are Vineyard.
Somos Viña.
We are Vineyard.
Think of how hard it is from somebody from the outside that does not know the culture. I don't care how much strategy they have. I don't care how much tactically wise they are. I don't care what their theological chops are. If they come into a setting and then fundamentally switch the culture, switch everything on everybody, that's a disaster. A word to the wise. If somebody has not tasted the culture, it's almost impossible for them to come in and adapt to the culture. The reason they're a leader, because they're a leader. And those two things, I think, are quite difficult to marry.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. Today's episode is a continuation of our 4-part mini-series about pastoral succession. Hosted by Super Regional Leader John Elmer, we'll be hearing from Phil Strout, the previous National Director for Vineyard USA, as well as the previous Senior Pastor of the Pathway Vineyard in Maine. We'll also hear from Alan Austin, who's the current Senior Pastor of the Pathway Vineyard. Let's listen in.
Hi, my name's John Elmer, and I'm one of the super regional leaders with Vineyard USA, and I will be doing today's podcast. We're continuing on this series of looking at pastoral transitions. There may be a couple hundred transitions in the next 5 to 7 years in the Vineyard. So this is a really important topic, and we're hearing from people who have done it and actually have done it well. Today, my guests are two of my favorite people in the Vineyard. And I'm not just saying that. You guys are top 17, I'd say for sure, right? Now, these are great people, great friends. From Phil Strout, who was a pastor at Pathway Vineyard in Lewiston, Maine. And also many of you know him as the national director. And Alan Austin, who is a pastor there for almost 30 years now, right? And the lead pastor, and took over for Phil. So, welcome, guys.
Thanks, Sean.
Good to be here.
Good. Hey, Phil, why don't you tell us how you began to realize it was time to begin a transition from Pathway, from being the lead pastor?
You know, when I came to Pathway, probably 5 years earlier, I had a near-death experience. I had a heart attack, couple of heart attacks, had quadruple bypass. And when I came to Pathway, I knew, and Alan and I have known each other for many, many years, even before that, I knew it was important that right out of the gate to start training and including someone that I thought could be my successor. So it actually started at the very beginning. When the day I came to Pathway, I knew someday someone else would take this church. And so, things like I included him in on the board of trustees. And then, I don't know how many years it was later, 7 or 8 years. Of course, the conspiracy of making me the national director. I knew I couldn't do 2 jobs. What I didn't know was taking the national director was doing 10 jobs. That's what I didn't know. But so it started early on. It was a natural thing in a sense. And I say that in the best way. For me, it was because I'd had the experience I had physically. And I mean, God knows, it's been 25 years, but I've always been ready for that day. So I started right at the beginning with Alan. With
that thought in mind, right from the beginning, did Alan know, or were you assured like this is the guy, or like thinking this is possibly the guy and I'm going to lean towards that? Well,
like I say, Alan and I have known each other since the 70s. So even though he looks younger, he's not that much younger than I am. So yeah, matter of fact, is when I was asked to come to Lewiston to pastor the church, I went to Alan and I said, do you want to pastor it? If you do, I'll support you. And so, I mean, it was that type of cooperation right from the get-go. And I'll let him speak for himself, but it was not something that came at me, oh, gee, I've got this other thing I have to go do, so I need to train somebody. I think any pastor should be training people, especially in succession, all the time. You never know when that bus is going to run you over.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Alan, how when Phil came to you and took the job and kind of let you know you were probably going to be next, how did that feel? What were you thinking?
Well, I knew immediately when the gentleman that brought me into ministry suddenly retired. I just intuitively knew that I was only about 5 years into my ministry vocation at that point in terms of full-time on a staff. I just intuitively knew I wasn't ready for that next leap into senior leadership. And quite honestly, Phil had been my mentor for years, invested a lot in me through the years. And I just counted it quite a privilege to have the opportunity to work with him. And I think the same day that he had that conversation with me, he was very gracious. He said what he said about if I wanted to lead, but he also said something that was profound that really shaped my philosophy of leadership as well. He said, I promise you this. He said, I will do everything within my power and my ability to make you as successful as you can be in your role. And that was quite profound to me. You often hear horror stories of leaders simply using people to propel themselves forward. And the fact that he was going to come in, lead Pathway, but do so with the intent of making me a better leader, making the other staff pastors better leaders. That's a philosophy that has now translated into my style of leadership and I think served us very well here.
Yeah, that's incredible and very different from some situations. How did he do that, Alan?
Well, like I said, he immediately gave me a lot of opportunity to lead. I never felt as though I only was in a position of leadership when he wasn't around. I felt he let me lead alongside him. He gave me a lot of opportunity to lead different projects and initiatives, even things that I was, not necessarily fully versed in. I'll never forget in 2005 when we did a large capital campaign and building project. I had never general contracted a building project, but he said, hey, believe you can do it. I'll continue to lead the church. I'll keep the pulpit in order, continue to give oversight to small groups. I need you to take this next season and lead this campaign and this building project. So being afforded opportunities and having somebody believe in me that I could do those things, it just naturally caused my leadership aptitude to grow and my confidence to grow. And so when we were getting close to a point where there needed to be a transition for him stepping into the national role, I felt fully equipped. I wouldn't say I was necessarily prepared for that moment. I mean, that kind of caught us both off guard, I think, a little bit when it happened. But, I kind of looking around the room quickly realized I think I'm the next guy in line here. But I felt pretty qualified, in a good part because of the investment and the opportunity that he gave me through the years.
Yeah, that's great. And I've seen you do that and continue to do that at Pathway with other leaders. And so Pathway has been one of those churches that produces leaders and is growing and impacting their community. So that's incredible. Phil, so you went in with this thought of, we're going to transition at some point. So you built that right into your fabric of leadership. What were some of the things that were stirring in you that said, now's the time to do the transition?
Well, I got this other job. I mean, when I was in college, training for ministry, it was always a great discussion we had. And I know that's a long time ago, but I remember clearly having the discussion because most of my close friends, we were all preparing to go somewhere in the world as far as missional stuff. And some of those guys are still there. I mean, they're in the Middle East. They're in Eastern Europe. My colleagues are literally all over the globe. I was one that always thought, I'm going to go somewhere. I am going to plant. And from where I plant, I will send. That was and I argued for that. Other guys were like, no, I'll do this for a few years. I'll do that. And actually it turned out to be just the opposite. I who argued for long-term staying stability, as Benedictine would say, the vow of stability, go and stay. I've had 8-9 year assignments. So early in my life, I realized I have an assignment and I need to prepare the next person, whoever's going to follow. So I would have been very happy to stay in Brazil. I would have been very happy to stay in Chile. I'd have been very happy to stay in Portland, Maine. I'd have been very happy to stay in Lewiston. But the Lord has had me in 8, 9, 10-year assignments. So it was very natural when the Vineyard asked me to be the national director. It was very natural for me to say, oh, this assignment must be done to the capacity that I was supposed to do it. And like I said, I had the day I came to Lewiston, I came with the intention to make sure there was somebody could step in when that was needed. So it's just been a part of my DNA. I mean, it has its own challenge. I would have liked to have been the guy who goes and stays somewhere for 30, 40, 50 years. But that wasn't my assignment. The good thing about it is when I married the girl that I married, that was a long-term assignment. That's been 50 years. So that's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you won on that deal. You won, Bill.
I did. You know it. I know it.
Anybody
she knows it.
Jan knows that she is a incredible woman.
Oh, she is. No, that's absolutely true.
So let me ask you though, let's press in a little bit here. So
right.
What helped you discern that, yes, I should take this national role and let go? Things were going well at Pathway. It seemed, that you really loved what you were doing. You loved the church. How did God tell you, no, this is your assignment? Because I know there's pastors out there thinking I really love what I'm doing. And I don't know there's another assignment. That was my case. I loved leading the Syracuse Vineyard and I didn't want to change. And I had to discern. The Lord said, no, I want you to do this national role.
Yeah.
How did you discern that?
Well, I had already done a couple of transitions, number one. And it wasn't on my radar screen. I mean, it wasn't. I was on the board at the time. The guys know this is a true story. That was the last thing that was on my mind. But all of a sudden, it was May 31st, 2011. I remember it like it was yesterday. I got this phone call and Doug Anderson said, hey, Phil, your name's come up on the, what do they call them? The nominees. You're one of the nominees. You got a lot of them, and you ought to think about this. So I was, the no was right here in my throat. I love Pathway, but I also loved Brazil and I loved Chile and the churches. I loved Portland and I loved Lewiston, but the Lord had already sort of set it in motion. And here's my fear. Here's my fear. And this is what I think many men and women fear about their careers, especially if it's gone well, is, if I stop doing this, the next assignment may suck. The next assignment, I may fail. I've got a good track record. I've had two things that have worked. Oh, but maybe the next one won't. Or I've just sort of created a niche for myself, so I'll stay doing this. Most of that had been blown out of the water. So when it came time, when the Vineyard, would I consider it? Instead of saying no, and this, I don't know if a lot of people know this, I had scheduled a week's retreat at a Jesuit center months ahead of all of this. I mean, I'd put it on the calendar. I was going to go away. It was all set up in New Brunswick, Canada. And then all of a sudden, this thing of the national director thing came up, which was this is puzzling. So I went and I said, Lord, I spent a week waiting on the Lord in silence, but I had this fascinating spiritual director. She was a 76-year-old lady who had been doing this for many years. And through the week, we just kept processing. She didn't give me any advice. She just asked me what the Lord was saying. And one night, after 6 days of nothing, one night I felt I should read Abraham in Genesis, where Abraham told Lot, wherever you go, if you go here, I'll go there. If you go there, I'll go here. And the Lord said, to me, that was like Abraham saying, I'll let the Lord choose for me. And I felt, oh, that is it right there. I'll let the Lord choose. So I'll stay in the process. And that way, if it happens, that's the Lord. And if it doesn't happen, that's the Lord. And I was, in a sense, I'll use a Ignatian word, indifferent. I didn't really care one way or the other. I just wanted to do the right thing in the right moment. The fact that I had already planned on a week of silence, and the very time, I mean, literally, it was like a week later, I think, not much more than that. That was the Lord. We couldn't make it up. You didn't have to set it up, and the rest is history. But that's why it wasn't just a discernment. It was set up ahead of time.
That's great. That's it's an important point. That fact that you had that, using the Jesuit word, the indifference, like, Lord, whatever you want. That's powerful and freeing for leaders that might be listening. And it's really very real. Like, you had something really going well.
Oh, yeah.
When the church is going well, you're comfortable, you have your niche. It's like you're on a gravy train. This is awesome. And sometimes the Lord kicks us out of a comfortable boat and calls us to a different boat that we don't quite know as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it wasn't from dissatisfaction or restlessness or anything. It was just, it came up. So I had to wait and see if it was the Lord.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good. Alan, how did you discern this to take this step? Like, he was, developing you, and you seem kind of like the natural next guy and all, but you had to discern what the Lord was calling you to. How did you discern that this was what the Lord was calling you to do?
Well, I, early on in my kind of development, realized that God was often providing me opportunities, and in providing me those opportunities, whether they came through mentors, people that were investing in me, or I really felt like I was hearing clearly from the Lord, I just really began the process of saying yes as opportunities came along. So when people ask, how have I arrived at the place I'm at in my ministry journey? It's because I just kept saying yes as opportunities came. So I remember very clearly that 2011, when Phil got that call saying, hey, would you throw your name in the ring there? I remember very clearly. We went out to lunch, went over to Chili's in Auburn, sat down eating lunch. And he said, so they've asked me to put my name in the hat for national director. And as soon as he said that, I said, dude, it's you. And he's like, no. There's a whole process we got to go through. I'd watched Phil's life, and I knew when he's talking about these 8, 9, 10-year assignments, I had said that about him to others for years. Like, Phil's journey has been one where God gives him these assignments, and then I just always kind of hoped in the back of my mind that Pathway was going to be the last assignment God gave him, because I really enjoyed working for him as his executive pastor at the time. And I just intuitively knew that in that moment he was going to be national director, and that was a crossroads for me in terms of my leadership at Pathway. And I knew this right off the bat. I knew if that's what God was doing, then God was going to get my yes. The only real fear I had at that point, I was very comfortable in my competency to lead. I just had never done the week in, week out preaching. I had preached a lot because Phil did travel some with his involvement for Vineyard missions and stuff over the years. I just didn't know, could I carry the thought of developing sermon series and casting vision for, the long term. And, quickly fell in love with that whole process. And I got to say, that's probably, one of the things I enjoy the most now. That was my only concern, but it was never a question of would I give it my yes? Because I just seen God be faithful time and time again. If I said yes to where I felt he was leading, he met me in it. And so I trusted that he would meet me in this role. And the one thing I had going for me that I think a lot of guys don't necessarily have in their transition stories, I had longevity at Pathway. I mean, I showed up here in 91. I was able to have, just at that point, a lot of history with the people around here. And so I didn't necessarily have to bear the weight of coming into a brand new environment that I knew nothing about, which is a whole nother point of transition. I think it's important to be able to recognize as soon as you can who that next person might be so that you can develop a working relationship. And it becomes a very natural process for the congregation. I mean, I already have my successor in line. Like the board knows who they are. The staff knows who they are. They know who they are. And I think if I could, speak of what I think guys and gals miss is they miss thinking about this early in their career, in their journey. And then it catches up with them. And then they have to make decisions that they might not have made had they thought about it a little bit earlier.
Yeah, that's such a good point. The earlier, the better in working and thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, with that thought, for both of you, I'd like you to answer, what should someone, hopefully there's people listening that are like thinking about now it's during their idea, I got to get ready for transition. What should they look for in a replacement? What kind of characteristics or qualities are high on the list that would help in having someone transition into a lead pastor role?
Bill, I'll let you start.
Okay. I think there's two things that it's fairly easy to answer, John, and it may not be everybody's story. And number one is because of what Alan just said, the fact that he had been here a long time, we had known each other, he knew the church knew him, we were friends. He didn't start by saying, okay, Phil left his mark, Phil's gone, now it's my turn, and switch culture, switch the vision, I'm gonna, that old dog, man, I hope the national movement can handle him, but I'm glad that old dog's gone. What he did was basically said, guys, this is like, let's just stay on the journey. This is what we do, because he had already bought in to what he and I were doing together. And one of the brilliant moves that he did that in my opinion is he stayed the course and kept most of the culture intact right from the beginning. Instead of trying to make a niche for himself, he just said, let's stay the course, and did it with his flavor, his style, etc. Now I say most of the cultures because the first thing he did, because we had a brand new auditorium and, we'd spent a lot of money. And I didn't want it. I'd seen so many Vineyard churches trashed with coffee and coffee stains. It was embarrassing. It looked like, I don't even want to say what I was going to say. It looked bad. So the first Sunday he was the pastor, he says, okay, remember, from now on, I know Phil would never let coffee in the auditorium, but from today on, you can have coffee. So he changed that culture at my expense. And I thought, okay, if that's that was actually a good one. Everybody cheered, and out with the old guy, in with the new. He's like much more friendly. So, but that is a true story. But the fact that he
let the kids run on the front lawn, you weren't.
Stop! You're the grumpy old man, John, who says get off my lawn, not me. Yeah, so I watched him do that. I watched him stay the course, because if somebody comes, think of how hard it is from somebody from the outside that does not know the culture. I don't care how much strategy they have. I don't care how much tactically wise they are. I don't care what their theological chops are. If they come into a setting and then fundamentally switch the culture, switch the everything on everybody, that's a disaster. And a word to the wise. If somebody has not tasted the culture, it's almost impossible for them to come in and adapt to the culture. The reason they're a leader, because they're a leader. And those two things, I think, are quite difficult to marry. That's my personal opinion. Yeah. I may be wrong, but that is my opinion.
So the core would be shared vision and values.
Yeah.
Right up there.
Yeah.
Culture. The core. the core, the values, but the culture, you guys know. Culture is everything in a congregation. Your values, your theology, your core, that's what makes it work. It's not smoke and whistles and bells and, your good show on Sunday. That doesn't, through my entire life, I have never had a commitment to have a sharp and wow Sunday morning, ever. I wanted the people to know and believe in what they were doing.
What else?
Yeah, I think a little bit more to that coffee story is I general contracted that project. So what Phil's not telling you is really, I was the biggest proponent for not having coffee in that room.
Exactly.
But I knew that, I wasn't going to preach better than Phil. I probably wasn't going to inspire better than Phil. I thought, but you know what? If I can win their heart with this little coffee move here, it will get me some equity right off the bat.
They did. By the second week, they were saying, Phil who?
Yeah. But yeah, no, I mean, I was, in a sense, I was a disciple of Jesus, but I was a disciple of Phil Strout. Like when 92, when he went and planted in Portland, at that point, he was doing a lot of investing in my life. And I would have followed him to the other side of the country the way I felt about him. But when they announced him planting the Portland Vineyard in 92, it was one of those moments that God clearly spoke to me and said, you're not going anywhere. And I just knew I wasn't going to follow and be part of that church plant. And I didn't really know why. It wasn't until 99 that I actually came on to staff in Lewiston as a vocation, as a paid position. Certainly you can read the rest of the story now. But no, I just believed in the way Phil led. I believed, had fallen in love with the Vineyard and a philosophy of ministry, and that our community responded to it. So I sure as heck wasn't going to take, what he had done and upend it and try to do this new thing, because I believed in what we were doing together. So it was very natural for me to just continue that. And the young guy that I've been investing in and preparing to succeed me in the future is a kid who grew up in Pathway and who loves the Main and the Plain, loves to lead people to Christ, loves to, baptize and be invested in the community, minister to the poor. And so I know people could be listening to this and think, I don't know that I have anybody in the pipeline. I think it's something you can begin to give prayer and attention to. Like what we give time and attention to usually is an opportunity for the Lord to really begin to highlight and to bring people into those things that we're praying about. Because I got a chance to work with the Vineyard 2000 to 2022 and do some mentoring for pastors that were transitioning, incoming pastors that had transitioned from a senior pastor. And sadly, some of them inherited not great things, because there had been no foresight into that succession plan. So I think it's wonderful that the Vineyard is doing this and try to help guys, gals around the country be prepared. Begin thinking now. You might be 45 years old in the prime of your ministry. I would say start bringing a succession plan before the Lord now. Don't wait till that last minute, and see what He might provide.
We're taking a moment today to share about Vineyard USA's Day of Giving, coming up on Sunday, August 4th, 2024. We're calling this day Seed and Soil, celebrating 50 years of the Vineyard, and taking this day to celebrate and recognize the story that God's written in this movement over our 50-year history as we invest in His story through the Vineyard for generations to come. This Day of Giving is not just another fundraising event. It's a unique opportunity to be a part of something bigger. Your financial partnership enables us to grow our transformative work in our churches and communities. Imagine the ripple effect of more churches being planted, more lives being transformed, and more hearts being touched by the love of Jesus. It's a moment to invest in how we embody the kingdom in the life of our churches, locally and for our movement, both nationally and globally. So join us in celebrating and supporting Vineyard USA on August 4th, 2024. Visit us at vineyardusa.org/generosity to learn more and make your donation. Together, we can advance the kingdom and bring about the change we wish to see in the world. Thank you for being a part of this incredible movement. Now let's get back to the podcast.
Yeah, having someone, a hometown person, is awesome. Chris Hannes who took over Syracuse Vineyard from me, grew up in his church, was in it when he's 4 years old and got saved here, got baptized here, got mentored here, did internship here, was on staff here, a whole bit. So it's similar to what you both have experienced. But lots of people listening right now don't have that.
Yeah.
So thinking about talking to right now pastors who don't have it in their church, or board members who are on search committees trying to figure this out right now, or even some of the younger people who are listening who feel called to be a senior leader, but how do I prepare for that? What would you say to them to look for in someone that could have the potential to be a great lead pastor? What would you tell him or her that might want to move in that space, how to prepare for that, or a board member, what to look for?
Well, my answer is pretty easy, John, and maybe too simplistic and doesn't apply to everybody, but I would make this a primal, absolute priority is whoever is going to take over the leadership of a church must match values, core, and culture that already exist, unless it's really bad. But it goes back to what I already said. I think that is an overlooked reality, because you can have great preachers, you can have strategic thinkers, you can have all sorts of things. Especially a church just going 20, 30 years. No, it's just 5 years. 5-year churches are still molding. But 20-year churches aren't molding. And that may sound like I don't know how that sounds, but I know what I mean. And because churches have to adapt, they have to pivot, they have to adjust. But if a church doesn't have values or culture, what do you got? And then to ask somebody that doesn't have that to come lead this is, boy, they would have to be a person, as St. Ignatius would say, they would have to pivot, because one person would have to change. But if you've got a church of 200 or 300 and you tell everybody in the church to change, that's hard. So I agree with Alan 100%. This is something that needs to be in the sauce all the time. It's just a part of life. It just is. And the guys that have worked for me through the years, I have asked them this question. If you get hit by a bus, who do I call? Now, I'm not talking about his mother and father or her mother and father. I'm talking about who's next. Who's next? And if they're not thinking about it, then I train them to be thinking about that. Sickness, death, stupidity can change a lot of things. So transitions are with us until the end. Successions are with us till the end. Match culture, core, and values. Got to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's my simple answer too, John, is start thinking about it and start tapping into the resources that are available. There are now guys, gals in the Vineyard that have gone through transitions, that have had a level of success. And, the Vineyard's always been a movement where we share, right? We share, the best practices with one another. So I'd say if you've yet to begin having those conversations, I think maybe a good place to start is just calling some of us that have walked through it and begin picking our brains a little bit. And because, I know, you guys did something in Syracuse that I think was very wise. I've had great relationship with you, and I've known your successor, Chris, for a number of years. And I don't know if you guys officially put it in your board minutes or not, but you guys asked me, hey, if we hit a tough part in this transition, will you be the guy we can go to kind of moderate whatever we might run into? And I thought that's just wise thinking, putting some of those things on the front end of transition, because I don't know how much time we have left, John, and if we're going to get to it, but I don't want people to also think that, Phil and I just have this case study and there was no difficulties in it. We had a couple of years that we had to kind of figure out the clunkiness of me being the senior leader, him being the national director, still part of our church. But we were committed because of our friendship to work through that. And now that we're in the sweet spot of, a ministry together in our life, but it's really the result of a lot of hard work, a lot of pressing in, a lot of honest conversation. I think it takes a humble man or gal to look in the mirror and realize I'm not going to be the guy one day. So what am I doing in preparation for that?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that, because no transition is without a bumps. And what were some of the bumps you hit, and how did you handle them?
Well, I think for me, we were prepared for a transition in that I think I felt confident and comfortable. The church felt confident and comfortable with me taking over the role. I think if Phil and I had any breakdown, it was just particularly once I knew he was going to live in Maine and still attend Pathway. I don't know that we were attentive enough to say, well, let's talk about that. We just kind of let things happen naturally. And I think if we erred anywhere, it was probably in giving each other too much space. What I mean by that is we never had a conversation about the amount of involvement that I desired from him. And I erred on the side of, he was facing a lot of complicated things for Vineyard USA at the time. So I gave him a great amount of space. I didn't ask anything of him, but he also reciprocated that. He gave me all kinds of space. And that for me became the detriment. Like all of a sudden I began noticing, well, yeah, Phil's part of Pathway, but he's really not part of Pathway. He's sitting in the back of the church. And I built up a little bit of resentment. If I'm honest, I'm like, why aren't you involved more with the time that you have? And when you build up resentment and then you don't speak to it, it can cause a little bit of tension. And I'd say for a couple of years, we remained dear friends, but I don't know that we communicated all that well on some areas. And then one day, sitting in the woods, just had a gut, honest talk. And I said something to the effect of, dude, I wish you'd be more involved at Pathway. And he's like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, when you visit other vineyards, you sit in the front row, you help minister during ministry time. And I feel like at Pathway, you just sit in the back. And he just said, okay. And that Sunday, he was in the front row with me, So it was just a simple little conversation that kind of broke the tension and kind of gave us the ability to say, no, let's do this together, even if our current assignments are different than what they had been. So that was my perception of it. And it was really good after that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so important for that whole idea of communication and being honest and real with one another. There's some trust. For Chris and I, we get together almost weekly and talk. And we've had a couple of flare-ups of something like stupid that, my own brokenness kind of gets exposed, and we've been able to talk about it and then be comfortable, move on. Yeah. And so, because I think there's so much value, if possible, for the former lead pastor to stay there, because he or she has so much wisdom to give and so much, skill and experience and insight that could be really helpful for a younger pastor coming on, if they can put their
absolutely.
And
we're a much better church. Phil and I having kind of resolved that, and then him really throwing, to the degree that he could. I mean, he still had a full-time job, but to the degree that he could, throwing himself into ministry, some leadership development, working with our staff, mentoring. We became a much better church because put pride, put egos aside, put offense aside, and just realize, we're friends, we're kingdom, we're in this together. Let's figure this out. And now we're still, beneficiaries of him and Jan's involvement. And it like, we all know this. It comes down to what? Communication. And we finally got there. And so it's been really good since.
Yeah, amen to all of that. It was, I was sitting in the back, stay out of the way. I'd go out the side door, I'd come in the side door. I didn't go out in the foyer for a year, which is just like you tried to do the right thing. But that's the thing about it, especially if you're going to stay, which, and in some situations it doesn't work. I get that. And I'm not going to be anybody's judge and jury, but these were our peeps. This was our home. These are our people. And, I am eternally grateful for the kindness. I mean, Pathway has been, and when I say Pathway, I mean Alan, and incredibly kind and inclusive. I'm in an office right now that Pathway lets me use, and they let me use it for the 10 years I was the national director. So it's a good thing. It's a good, but I like the question because, we had to figure this out. But because we had a foundation, we could. Had we not had a foundation, it might have been a whole nother story. And that's why, again, let's say it again, as much as possible, raise up the people who are going to lead. Don't depend on somebody else with a different core, different values, different theology, and different culture. And we import that. It's almost a recipe for disaster. And I could give you cases, but I won't.
That would be the really fun episode. So many stories.
Yeah.
Well, let me, and I got an ending question that's different for each of you. But I think they're both very important. Alan, I'll ask your question first. What would you say to people who are listening, who are staff pastors somewhere and feel like God's called them, made them to be a lead pastor? What would you tell them to be doing now to prepare themselves for future lead pastor role? Because with all these transitions, we need lots of men and women to step up and grow up to be capable of leading. So what would you say to that group?
Well, whether it's going to be a senior leadership role in their current congregation or maybe taking an assignment that pops up somewhere around the Vineyard, I would say, start by communicating that with whoever's investing in you right now, whoever's leading you right now. Make that known. Don't necessarily hold that information off till the opportunity arises. And I say that, through experience. I hired a worship pastor who's just been gold, who's probably going to lead at a much higher capacity at some point than he's leading right now in the context of the Vineyard, whether that's Pathway or anywhere else. But it started with him approaching his senior pastor and saying, "Hey, I have this. I feel I have this call from the Lord on my heart. I think I'm supposed to have some opportunities in ministry vocationally." And so he said, if you know of anything, you have anything, or you know of anything, let me know. And this senior pastor is a good Vineyard pastor because rather than just kind of hold on to that information and leverage it for himself, he knew I was looking and he gave me a call. And that's one of the things I love about the Vineyard, willing to give away our best, so, and I would like to think I'd do the same. If one of my staff pastors walked in and said, "Hey, I really feel like I'm supposed to lead at the next level," whether that's here or somewhere else around the Vineyard, I think it's my responsibility. It's my obligation. And this goes way back to what Phil said to me. Like his role was to make me more successful in my role. I think I'm to do the same for others. So I would say that would be it. If you have that unction, that inclination, let it be known and let people that can help get you the opportunities, let them get you pointed in the right direction.
We at Syracuse too, I would always encourage staff, "Hey, tell me if you're thinking of that." And then when they said, "Yeah, I think I want to," and this is early on sometimes where there wasn't any transition anywhere near in the future. But I'd say, well, I would work with them and help them begin to think like a lead pastor and talk to them about why I made that decision and how, what would you do in this situation? Begin them to build those muscles up of thinking like a leader in a new level, which helped us to produce leaders that we could give away and eventually replace me too.
Yeah.
That's really good, Alan. Phil, what would you tell lead pastors now who are looking at transition in the next 5 or 7 years or whatever, in 2 years, or board members who need to bring this topic up, or what would you tell to those in place in leadership now about transition?
Well, it's coming. Transition comes to all people. It comes to all institutions, comes to all families. And I think I've said really the major things is culture, core, values, theology. What do you believe? Why do you believe it? That is crucial right now. And it will be crucial for your entire career. So if you're leading a church, know someday you will not be leading the church. And it's just like, when you're one of the cool kids, there comes a day you're not the cool kid anymore. Right?
John knows that. John knows that.
Yeah. No, but you're in your prime. Someday comes you're not in your prime. Right? And time waits for nobody. But I give the Vineyard a lot of space in learning how to transition because we're a young movement.
Yeah, that's right.
We're young, but we're not young. We're not brand new, but we're not. We're learning how to do this. And I would, if the Lord tarries, which I'm hoping He doesn't, but if He does, and there's another 100 years or 50 years or something, I think the next guys will handle a lot of this a little bit better because they're going to listen to stuff like this. We're laying down, leaving some breadcrumbs in the thick forest, but I think we're going to get there. So even though we've had some real missteps, that's okay. That's okay. We're not a 100-year-old movement. We have not transitioned many generations. But I think the men and women who are leading in the Vineyard right now know that this is one of the important things to keep beating this drum. And exactly what you're doing with this, John, and with the podcast and all of that. It's another brick on the wall. It's another breadcrumb, and you can follow that through the thick forest called ministry. So, yeah, that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, Christina Lowry, our Associate National Director for Church Health, has resources that she's highlighting for churches that are in transition. So make sure you check those out. Well, Phil Allen, thank you so much for your time, your wisdom, your input. It's been great. You guys are incredible leaders, and I just want to thank you for the Vineyard at large, just for all that you do and have done, and I'm sure will do to the very end of following Jesus. You've made an impact. You've made a huge impact on my life, both of you. So thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, John.
And cut.
Awesome.
Bam.
Boom.
Boom.
John, if I get a text in 5 minutes saying, oops, I forgot to press this button.
Don't call me, I'll call you. Don't call me, I'll call you.
As we celebrate our 50-year anniversary in the Vineyard, if you're interested in learning more about Vineyard history, there are plenty of resources for you. Check out our show notes for links to books, YouTube videos, and more to learn about Vineyard history and identity. And make sure to keep listening to the podcast this year for stories of Vineyard churches throughout the year.